She had built a billion-dollar company from a wheelchair. They still thought she was weak. At 30 years old, Vanessa Sterling walked into that hotel lobby the way she always did. Spine straight, eyes sharp, chin level. Except she didn't walk. She rolled. And in the space of 60 seconds, 3 men in $12,000 suits decided that made her fair game. What they didn't see was the janitor leaning on a mop handle 12 feet away. What they couldn't know was that the quiet man in the worn gray uniform had once disappeared into enemy territory for weeks at a time, alone, and come home every single time. They laughed at her wheelchair. He put down the mop. The lobby went completely silent. Org. If you've been waiting for a story about what real strength actually looks like, you just found it. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss the ones that hit hardest. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. From the beginning. The Hargrove Grand didn't look like the kind of place where someone's life could change in under 3 minutes. It looked like what it was. A monument to money. The kind of hotel that hung crystal chandeliers over marble floors and hired staff specifically for their ability to make wealthy guests feel like the floor had been polished just for them. The lobby smelled of white flowers and leather, and something faintly citrus. The scent pumped through the ventilation system at a cost that would have covered a family's grocery bill for 6 months. Ethan Carter had mopped that floor 4 times this week. He knew every seam in the marble. He was working the far corner near the concierge alcove. Slow, methodical passes with the mop, the kind of invisible labor that people in expensive clothes look directly through without seeing. When the glass revolving door swept open and Vanessa Sterling came in. He noticed her the way he noticed everything, without appearing to notice at all. She moved through the entrance in a sleek black power wheelchair, the kind with a low profile and a joystick control that she operated with the casual ease of someone who'd long stopped thinking about it. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, hair pulled back tight, a leather portfolio balanced across her lap. Mid-30s, maybe a little younger, with the kind of composed expression that takes years to build. The look of a person who has learned to walk into rooms and wait for people to underestimate her. Behind her came 2 members of her team, a younger woman with a tablet and a lanyard, and a man in his 40s carrying a leather briefcase who looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. They moved at Vanessa's pace without being asked, the way people do when they've learned that their leader sets the tempo. Ethan went back to mopping. The lobby was busy for a Thursday afternoon. The Hargrove Grand was hosting a 2-day conference, something in the technology and acquisition space, which meant the atrium had been filling since noon with a particular species of human, men who had made enough money to forget what it felt like to be told no, who wore their confidence the way other people wore cologne in amounts that suggested they had no idea how much was too much. He'd watched 3 of them come in together around 2 o'clock. They'd taken up a cluster of chairs near the central fountain, the kind of seating arrangement that wasn't really sitting so much as holding court. The tallest one was maybe 50, silver-haired, the type who would describe himself as self-made while glossing over the inheritance that had funded the first venture. His name, Ethan would later learn, was Douglas Whitfield. The 2 with him were younger, associates maybe, or junior partners doing the careful work of laughing at everything Whitfield said. They had drinks. They were loud in the contained way that men get loud when they know the environment belongs to them. Ethan had pegged them the moment they sat down. 30 years of reading rooms. First in neighborhoods that didn't forgive mistakes, then in training environments designed to break people, then in places that didn't appear on any map, had left him with an involuntary habit of sorting the people around him. Not judging, just reading, knowing. Those 3 were the kind of loud that could turn into something. He kept mopping. Vanessa had reached the front desk and was speaking with the concierge, something about a suite modification, adjusting the layout of a conference room. And from where Ethan stood, he could hear the even, precise quality of her voice. She wasn't asking. She was specifying. There's a difference, and she clearly understood it. That was when Douglas Whitfield looked over. It wasn't a look that required much interpretation. Ethan had seen the same one on a different kind of face, in a different kind of context, more times than he could count. The look of a man who has spotted something he finds absurd, and who intends to share that with the people around him. Whitfield leaned toward one of his companions and said something. The companion looked. Then the other one looked. Then they laughed, the sound carrying across the fountain in a way that was almost certainly intentional. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the mop handle. He kept his face blank. Vanessa didn't react. But her assistant glanced over, and Ethan saw the woman's jaw tighten before she looked back down at her tablet. The concierge finished checking Vanessa in and handed over the keycards. Vanessa thanked him, brief, genuine, and turned the wheelchair toward the elevator bank. That was when Whitfield stood up. "Well," he said, loudly enough that at least a dozen people could hear, "at least they gave her a room on the ground floor." His companion snickered. Vanessa stopped. Not because she was rattled, Ethan could see that clearly. She stopped the way someone stops when they're making a decision. She turned the chair around. "I'm sorry?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Whitfield spread his hands like a man performing for an audience he'd already decided was on his side. "No offense intended, just an observation." He gestured vaguely at the wheelchair. "Must be complicated, traveling for business, all the logistics." "I manage," Vanessa said. "Obviously, someone has to." He looked at her briefcase, her portfolio, the two team members behind her. "Sterling Technologies, right? Heard you're here about the Mercer deal." "I am." Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. It barely reached his mouth. "Bold move, ambitious, for anyone." He let the pause stretch just long enough. "Surprised Mercer's board approved the preliminary meeting, honestly. There are questions out there about leadership continuity, stability." Another glance at the wheelchair, fast enough to be deniable. That sort of thing. The lobby had gotten quieter. Not silent, but the particular kind of quiet where people are listening while pretending not to. Vanessa's assistant looked like she was about to say something. Vanessa put one hand up, just slightly, and the woman stopped. "Are you on the Mercer board, Mr. Whitfield, Douglas Whitfield? Are you on the Mercer board, Mr. Whitfield? I have relationships there, yes." "Then I'll see you in the meeting room tomorrow morning," Vanessa said. "You can raise your stability concerns in front of everyone. I'll bring the company's 3-year growth projections, our restructuring model, and the independent valuation report. Should be a productive conversation." She turned the chair back toward the elevator. Whitfield's face changed. The performance slipped just slightly, the easy confidence cracking into something uglier underneath. He took 2 steps forward and reached out, and his hand came down on the back of Vanessa's wheelchair and gripped it. She went rigid. "You should think carefully," Whitfield said, his voice lower now, the jovial quality gone, "about who you're walking into a room with tomorrow. There are people at this conference who could make the Mercer deal disappear before it ever reaches a vote. People who feel strongly that certain, let's say, circumstances disqualify a CEO from the kind of sustained high-pressure leadership a merger of this scale demands." His thumb pressed into the handle of her chair like a punctuation mark. "I'm just trying to do you a favor. Walk away from this one. There will be other deals." The lobby was very quiet now. Ethan set down the mop. He crossed the marble floor without hurrying. He didn't call out. He didn't announce himself. He simply moved into the space between Whitfield and Vanessa and stopped there, close enough that Whitfield had to look up at him. Up close, Ethan was not an imposing figure in the way that word usually gets used. He wasn't unusually tall. He wasn't built like someone who spent hours in a gym. He was broad-shouldered in the way that comes from years of carrying weight rather than lifting it recreationally, and he had a quality of absolute stillness that wasn't natural to most people. The kind of stillness that isn't relaxation but its opposite. Everything held. Everything ready. He looked at Whitfield's hand on the wheelchair. "Sir?" Ethan said. His voice was calm the way flat water is calm. "Take your hand off the chair, please." Whitfield blinked. Then he looked at the gray janitor's uniform, at the name tag, at the mop cart parked 12 feet behind them, and he laughed. "Are you serious?" He looked at his companions, delighted. "The janitor's going to tell me what to do?" He looked back at Ethan. "Son, I've spent more on that watch than you make in a year. Walk away." "I'll ask one more time," Ethan said. "Take your hand off the chair." "Or what? You'll mop me?" More laughter from the companions. Whitfield's hand stayed where it was. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice in a way that was more threat than confidence. You have any idea who I am? One call and this entire hotel loses my business. That includes you losing your job. You understand what I'm saying to you? Ethan looked at him for a moment, not through him, at him, the kind of direct eye contact that most people find deeply uncomfortable, the kind that doesn't carry aggression but doesn't carry deference either. Just attention, complete and steady. I understand what you're saying, Ethan said. I also see at least 4 ceiling cameras pointed at this area right now, and I can count 11 guests within earshot who've stopped moving. Your hand is on a woman's wheelchair without her permission. That's the situation. He paused. Whatever you think happens next, think again. Whitfield's jaw tightened. He looked around, really looked for the first time, and registered the stillness of the lobby. The concierge had stopped pretending to type. A woman near the fountain had her phone at chest level. A bellhop by the elevator bank had turned fully toward them. Whitfield's hand came off the wheelchair. He straightened. This isn't over, he said. For today it is. Ethan stepped back. Enjoy your evening, sir. Whitfield looked at him for another moment with the expression of a man deciding whether to escalate something he knew he'd already lost. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator bank, his 2 companions falling in beside him, all 3 of them suddenly very interested in their phones. The lobby stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then a bellhop near the desk exhaled audibly, and somewhere a conversation started up again, and the Hargrove Grand slowly remembered itself. Ethan turned to where Vanessa had been. She was watching him. Not with gratitude exactly, or not only that. She was watching him the way a person watches something they haven't fully classified yet. Her assistant was already beside her, hand on her shoulder, saying something quietly, but Vanessa wasn't listening. She was looking at Ethan. You work here? She said. Maintenance, he said. She looked at the mop cart, then back at him. You're not going to tell me it was nothing. No, he agreed. Good, because it wasn't. She held his gaze for a moment. I've had people do worse in front of more witnesses. Most of them just watch. Ethan didn't say anything to that. Ethan Carter, he said, and offered his hand. She took it. Her grip was firm and brief. Vanessa Sterling. I know who you are, he said. You want me to speak to hotel management about what happened? I can give a statement. She considered it. Not tonight. Tonight I have a dinner to prepare for. She shifted the controller on her wheelchair, then paused. Mr. Carter, what you just did, what made you get involved? Plenty of people were watching. He thought about that for a second, really thought, rather than reaching for the easy answer. It's not complicated, he said. He had his hand on your chair. You didn't put it there. He shrugged once, a small motion. Some things you don't need a reason to stop. Vanessa studied him for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Not uncomfortable, just longer, the way someone looks when they're revising a conclusion they'd already drawn. Thank you, she said finally. Genuinely. Have a good evening, Ethan said. He went back to the mop cart. Behind him, he heard the elevator doors open. He heard Vanessa and her team step inside. He heard the doors close. He stood with his hands on the cart for a few seconds, looking at the marble floor. The lobby around him had returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations restarted, luggage moved, the fountain murmured. Within 5 minutes, most of the people in that atrium would have already reframed what they'd watched into something smaller, something easier to fold away. Ethan picked up the mop and went back to work. He had 40 minutes left on his shift. His daughter's school bus dropped her at the corner of Elm and 4th at 5:15. He needed to be there. That was the whole plan. That had been the whole plan for 2 years now. Shift ends, school bus corner, dinner, homework, the particular kind of tired that comes not from the body, but from trying to figure out how to be 2 people at once. He worked the mop across the floor in slow arcs, back the way he'd come. Somewhere up above him, through 17 floors of marble and glass and money and manufactured air, Vanessa Sterling was sitting at a desk in a hotel suite, pulling files from a leather portfolio, preparing for a meeting that had more pressure behind it than most people would ever fully understand. And Douglas Whitfield was somewhere in the same building, making calls. Ethan didn't know that part yet. He found out later. But the version of him that had spent years learning to read the texture of a situation, The version that had never entirely come home from places where reading it wrong had permanent consequences, that version had already filed something away. A small flag, the quiet, persistent kind. He finished the corner, checked his watch. 32 minutes to shift end. He pushed the cart toward the service corridor and didn't look back. The school bus was 11 minutes late. Ethan stood at the corner of Elm and 4th with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching the end of the block the way he'd once watched tree lines. Not anxious exactly, but tuned, present. The neighborhood around him was the kind that used to be something and was working on becoming something again, caught in that in-between state where a renovated coffee shop sat next to a boarded-up laundromat and neither seemed surprised by the other. When the yellow bus finally swung around the corner, he let out a breath he hadn't been fully aware he was holding. Lily came down the steps the way she always did, backpack hanging off one shoulder, hair escaping whatever Ethan had done with it that morning, already talking before she'd fully cleared the bottom step. Dad, listen, something happened with Marcus at lunch and it wasn't my fault, but Mrs. Peterson said it was both our faults, which is not the same thing as it being my fault. Slow down, Ethan said. Are you okay? I'm fine, it's just... Marcus said my drawing looked like a potato, and I said at least I could draw something that wasn't a stick figure, and then we both had to sit out at recess, which is not how you handle someone being rude. Lily looked up at him with the particular expression of a 9-year-old who knows she's right and is frustrated that being right doesn't automatically win the argument. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, long-lashed, capable of communicating entire paragraphs without a word. Ethan had learned to brace himself for that look years ago and still hadn't figured out a reliable defense against it. He started it, she said. Probably, Ethan said. Still matters how you respond. He put his hand on top of her head briefly. Not a ruffle, just a touch. Show me the drawing. She pulled it out of her backpack immediately, which told him she'd been planning to show him regardless of how the conversation went. It was a horse, done in colored pencil, with a level of anatomical ambition that slightly exceeded her current technical ability. The legs were doing something complicated that real horse legs didn't quite do. It doesn't look like a potato, Ethan said. I know. The legs are a little, I know, Dad. I'm just saying. I know. But she was almost smiling. She stuffed the drawing back and hiked the backpack up. What's for dinner? I was thinking pasta. You always think pasta. Pasta is reliable. Pasta is boring. Pasta, Ethan said, has never let me down. She rolled her eyes in the specific theatrical way that he was fairly sure she'd been practicing in the mirror and fell into step beside him. They walked the 4 blocks home like that. Her talking, him listening, the city doing its late afternoon thing around them. He liked this part of the day. Not because it was easy. It wasn't always easy. And tonight he was tired in a way that sat somewhere behind his eyes, but because it was real, specific. The weight of her voice, the particular rhythm of her sneakers on the sidewalk, things he could account for. He made pasta. She did homework at the kitchen table while he cooked, asking him twice to explain fractions in a way that made sense, which he attempted with mixed results. They ate. She told him more about Marcus. He told her carefully that sometimes people said unkind things because they wanted a reaction, and the best response to that was usually to not give them one. Did someone do that to you today? She asked. He looked up from his plate. What makes you ask? She shrugged in the way that meant she'd noticed something he hadn't intended to show. You get this face sometimes like you're somewhere else. He sat with that for a second. Something happened at work, he said. It's fine. What happened? A man was rude to someone and I asked him to stop. Lily considered this with the gravity of a person running through implications. Did he stop? Eventually. Good. She went back to her pasta. Mrs. Peterson says you should always stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Ethan looked at his daughter. Mrs. Peterson's right, he said. He did the dishes. He read to Lily for 20 minutes. They were working through a book about a girl who discovered a hidden underground city beneath her school, which Lily found completely plausible, and Ethan found surprisingly well written. He turned her light off at 8:45, which was later than he intended and earlier than she wanted. He sat at the kitchen table afterward with a glass of water and did not turn on the television. The day kept reassembling itself. The lobby, the sound of Whitfield's laugh when he realized he was talking to a janitor. The way Vanessa Sterling's spine had gone rigid when a stranger's hand came down on her chair. The look she'd given Ethan afterward, not helpless, not grateful in the soft, unfocused way people offered gratitude when they didn't quite know what else to give. Something more specific than that. Evaluating. He drank his water and went to bed. He didn't see her the next morning. His shift started at 7, and he worked 2 floors of guest rooms with a housekeeping cart before coming back down to the lobby at 9. The conference had started by then. He could see the attendees moving through the atrium toward the main event rooms, lanyards swinging, the particular low-grade performance of professional networking already underway. He was cleaning the glass panels near the east entrance when one of the concierge staff, a woman named Priya, who'd worked the desk for 3 years and had exactly 0 patience for nonsense, came up beside him. Sterling's team sent a note down this morning, Priya said, not looking at him, voice low. Asked for the name of the maintenance worker from yesterday. Front desk referred it to building management. Ethan kept cleaning the glass. All right. Whitfield complained too, said you were aggressive and unprofessional. She glanced at him sideways. Management reviewed the camera footage at 6 this morning. You're fine. Whitfield is not having a great week. Not my problem, Ethan said. No, Priya agreed. Still thought you should know. She went back to the desk. He finished the glass panels and moved on. The conference broke for lunch at noon, and the lobby refilled. Ethan was restocking towels in the fitness center corridor when he heard his name. Not called loudly, but with a kind of precision that made it land clearly regardless. He turned. Vanessa Sterling was coming down the accessible corridor that ran parallel to the main hallway, her assistant a half step behind. She had changed from the charcoal blazer into something dark navy, hair down this time, though the composed expression was identical to yesterday's. If the meeting this morning had gone badly, her face wasn't advertising it. Mr. Carter, she said, do you have a few minutes? I'm on shift, he said. I know, I spoke with your supervisor. She held his gaze steadily. He said it was fine. He looked at her for a moment, then set the towels down on the cart. What can I do for you? She gestured toward a small seating area at the end of the corridor, 2 chairs and a bench, positioned near a window that looked out onto the hotel's courtyard. Relatively private. Ethan followed her there and stood rather than sat, which she didn't seem bothered by. Priya at the front desk told me you've worked here for about 8 months, Vanessa said. That's right. And before that? He could have deflected. He considered it briefly. Military, Navy, I got out 2 years ago. Something in her expression shifted slightly. Not surprise exactly. More like a peace landing in a place she'd already half prepared. That explains some things, she said. Does it? The way you assessed the room, the way you positioned yourself before you said a word to Whitfield. You weren't reacting. You were already 3 steps ahead. She said it matter-of-factly, not as flattery. What did you do in the Navy? I'd rather not go into specifics. She accepted that without pushing. Are you happy here? At the hotel? The question wasn't what he'd expected, and he didn't immediately have an answer that felt honest and also concise. It's work, he said finally. It's steady. I have a daughter. Steady matters. Vanessa nodded once. The kind of nod that means I heard that, and I'm filing it accurately rather than just waiting for my turn to talk. I'm going to be direct with you, she said. I want to offer you a position. While Ethan said nothing. Temporary, to start. 3 weeks. I have a shareholder event coming up, the final stage of the Mercer acquisition process. The security team I normally use is competent, but what happened yesterday made me realize I've been underestimating a particular kind of risk. The kind that isn't about logistics. She paused. I need someone who can read a room, who doesn't lose their head, who doesn't, she searched briefly, perform authority. You do none of those things. I'm a janitor, Ethan said. I know what you are right now, she said. I'm asking about 3 weeks. He looked out the window at the courtyard for a moment. A couple sat at one of the outdoor tables sharing a late lunch, leaning toward each other in the way people do when they're still new enough to want proximity. He watched them without any particular feeling. "What's the threat level?" he asked. "Yesterday wasn't random rudeness, was it?" It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. "Probably not," she said. "Whitfield has relationships with at least 2 board members who've been vocal about concerns with the merger. I don't know yet whether yesterday was opportunistic or coordinated." She met his eyes. "That's part of what I'd need you to help me figure out. I'm not an investigator. I'm not asking you to investigate. I'm asking you to be present, to watch, to tell me when something feels wrong, the way you told Whitfield he'd miscalculated yesterday, before he'd finished making the mistake." She straightened slightly. "I have lawyers. I have analysts. I don't have anyone who does what you did in that lobby." Ethan stood there with his hands at his sides. He was aware of the weight of the conversation, not its importance in any abstract sense, but its specific gravity, the way it was pulling at him. "I'd need to think about it," he said. "That's fair." She reached into the portfolio on her lap and produced a business card. It was plain: name, number, email, the Sterling Technologies logo in the corner. She held it out and he took it. "I'd want an answer by tomorrow evening. The event is in 11 days. He looked at the card. "Ms. Sterling." "Vanessa." "Vanessa." He said it without particular ease, not rude, just careful. "Why me?" "There are private security contractors who do exactly this for a living. People with current credentials, better equipment, established protocols." She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. "When Whitfield had his hand on my chair," she said finally, "there were maybe 30 people in that lobby. I counted afterward from the camera footage." She paused. 11 of them were looking directly at what was happening. None of them moved. Not the concierge, not the bellhops, not the guests. She looked at him steadily. "You moved. You moved without being asked, without any visible calculation about what it might cost you. And when you got there, you didn't try to be impressive about it. You just stopped it." She left a space after that. "That's not a skill you can hire from a security agency. It's either in someone or it isn't." Ethan looked at the card again. Then he slid it into his shirt pocket. "Tomorrow evening," he said. "Tomorrow evening," she confirmed. He went back to the towel cart and finished his shift. He told himself he wasn't going to take the job. He thought about it the entire drive home. He thought about it while Lily showed him a new drawing, better proportioned than yesterday's horse, a dog this time with enormous ears. He thought about it while he cleaned up after dinner, while Lily did her bath, while he sat on the edge of her bed, and she talked about the Underground City book and whether there were real underground cities anywhere. "There are," he told her. "A few." "Do people live there?" "Some, historically. Less now." "Could we live underground?" "We could not." "Why not?" "Because you need sunlight," he said. "You'd last about 4 days before you started complaining." She laughed, which was the point, and he turned her light off 12 minutes later than he'd intended. He sat at the kitchen table again. The card was on the table in front of him. He hadn't taken it out of his pocket intentionally. He'd found it there when he changed out of his work clothes. The thing was, he knew she was right about the threat not being random. He hadn't been able to articulate it to himself clearly until she said it, but it had been sitting at the back of his mind since yesterday. The staging of it. The way Whitfield had positioned himself, the way he'd known who Vanessa was, the specific language he'd used. Stability, leadership continuity, circumstances. Every word had been chosen. This was not a man having a bad day and taking it out on a stranger. This was a man delivering a message and expecting it to land. The question was who'd sent it. He picked up the card. He turned it over. There was nothing on the back. He thought about the last job he'd turned down, a private contractor offer that would have paid 4 times what the hotel paid, that would have taken him overseas for 6-month rotations, that would have required him to hand Lily to his sister-in-law in Portland for half the year. He'd turned it down without sleeping on it. Some things were clear. This was less clear. The hotel job was never permanent. He'd known that. He'd taken it because it was close to Lily's school and the hours were consistent, and it asked nothing of him that he couldn't give, which after 2 years was what he needed. But 3 weeks with Vanessa Sterling wasn't a career change. It wasn't going overseas. It was here, in the city, with an exit date built into the offer. He called his neighbor Mrs. Okafor at 8:15, which was late enough that he considered not calling and early enough that she was still awake. "I might have a short-term work thing," he told her. "Longer hours. I'd need to know if you could be around for Lily's school pickup some days, maybe most days, for a few weeks." "Ethan," Mrs. Okafor said, in the tone of a woman who had been a neighbor for 18 months and had formed firm opinions, "you call me at 8 o'clock to ask me that? I've been telling you for 6 months I'm happy to help. My answer is yes, same as it was every other time." "I didn't want to assume." "You need to stop not assuming." A pause. "Is it a good opportunity?" "I don't know yet." "Is it safe?" He considered the question seriously. "Probably," he said. "Probably," she repeated, with the texture of someone who had learned to interpret Ethan's probably accurately. "I'll be here. You do what you need to do." He called Vanessa's number the following evening at 6:15. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Carter?" "Ethan's fine," he said. "I'll take the 3 weeks." A short pause. "Good. Can you start Monday?" "Yes?" "I'll have my assistant send over an NDA and the basic parameters tonight. We'll talk through specifics in the morning." Another pause, briefer. "And Ethan? Thank you. Let's see how it goes first," he said. He heard something that might have been a short, quiet laugh on the other end. "Fair enough," she said. Monday. He hung up and sat with the phone on the table. He wasn't sure if this was a good decision. He wasn't sure it was a bad one either. In his experience, the decisions that fell clearly into one category or the other were the easier ones, the ones you knew before you made them. This was the other kind. The kind you make because the alternative is to do nothing, and doing nothing when you can see the shape of a problem has never sat right with him. Lily had left her colored pencils on the kitchen counter. He picked one up, a dark red, and turned it over between his fingers, then set it down. Monday. Sterling Technologies occupied 4 floors of a glass tower on the west side of the financial district, which was not the tallest building on the block or the most recently built, but was maintained with the kind of meticulous attention that spoke to someone at the top, caring about details. The lobby, a real corporate lobby this time, not a hotel, had a reception desk staffed by 2 people who were simultaneously efficient and visibly unintimidated by the constant flow of suited visitors. A sign on the wall near the elevator bank read simply, "Sterling Technologies, Innovation Without Permission." Ethan thought about that line for a moment before the elevator arrived. He met the existing security coordinator, a man named Roderick, who was professional and slightly guarded in the way security people often were when someone came in above them without warning. Ethan made a point not to override anything Roderick said in the first meeting and spent most of it asking questions and listening. He'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose access to useful information was to make people feel replaced rather than supplemented. Vanessa's assistant, whose name was Claire, and who turned out to be sharper than her professional demeanor initially suggested, walked him through the schedule for the shareholder event. It was 11 days out. The venue was the Langford Center, a private event facility with 3 levels and 2 exterior access points. Expected attendance was around 200 people, a mix of major shareholders, Mercer board representatives, financial press, and invited partners. "What's the security arrangement at the Langford?" Ethan asked. "Standard," Claire said. "Contracted team, guest list verification at entry, in-house building security on each floor?" "Who controls the contracted team?" "We book them through an agency. The lead coordinator is someone we've used before." "Have you used them for an event this high profile before?" Claire looked at him. "Not exactly this profile, no." "I want to meet with the lead coordinator this week," he said, "before the event." "I'll arrange it." He spent the rest of the first day doing 3 things: walking the existing security protocols for Vanessa's daily movements, reviewing the camera systems at the company's main office, and quietly pulling together everything available on Douglas Whitfield from public sources. business records, affiliated companies, press mentions going back 5 years. What he found wasn't alarming in isolation. Whitfield ran a private investment group with positions in several tech-adjacent companies. He sat on the advisory boards of two firms that would have direct competitive interest in seeing the Mercer merger fail. He had a history of aggressive negotiating tactics that occasionally crossed into territory that generated complaints but not lawsuits, close enough to the line to be effective, far enough back to be deniable. But it was the timing of his appearance at the Hargrove Grand that didn't add up. Whitfield's office was in Boston. The conference at the hotel had been a secondary industry event, not the kind of gathering that would typically draw someone at his level unless they had a specific reason to be there. He'd been there because Vanessa was there. Ethan was almost certain of it. He wrote nothing down. He kept his observations in the arrangement that worked best for him. Spatial, sequential, each piece placed relative to the others, the gaps between them as informative as what filled them. On his third day, he met with Vanessa directly for the first time since coming on. She had a corner office with a window that faced west, light coming in at a low angle in the late afternoon. The desk was functional rather than decorative, surface covered with organized papers, two monitors, a charging station for the wheelchair's components along the wall. She was on a call when he arrived and held up one finger without looking away from the window. He waited near the door and looked at the room. There was a framed photo on the near shelf. Vanessa younger, maybe mid-20s, standing beside an older woman who shared her cheekbones and her direct expression. There was a small cactus on the windowsill that looked like it had not been watered recently. There was a stack of folders on the visitor chair that suggested visitors were not common. She finished the call. "Sorry, Mercer's outside counsel is having feelings. Anything I need to know about?" "Probably not yet." She turned to face him fully. "How are you settling in?" "Fine. I have some questions about the Langford Center event." "Go ahead." He ran through them methodically. Access protocols, the timing of the shareholder dinner portion versus the presentation portion, the list of who'd confirmed versus who was still pending, the two board members he'd identified as having relationships with Whitfield. She answered each one with the same direct efficiency, adding context where she had it, telling him plainly when she didn't. At the end he said, "I think Whitfield wasn't at that hotel by coincidence." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking the same thing since the morning after it happened." "Have you flagged it with legal?" "I mentioned it. Without evidence, it's difficult to act on." "What would evidence look like to you?" She considered it. Something that connects his presence at the hotel to a deliberate campaign against the merger. Not just competitive positioning, actual interference, the kind that crosses from aggressive business tactics into something actionable. Ethan nodded. "I want to dig into the attendee list from that hotel conference. Cross-reference it against anyone with a financial stake in the Mercer deal going either direction." "Claire can get you the list." "I'd also like to look at your email security protocols." Vanessa's expression shifted slightly. Not defensively, more like someone recalculating. "You think there's been access to internal communications?" "I think if someone wanted to know your schedule precisely enough to position themselves at the right hotel at the right time, they'd need reliable information. Public calendar is one way, inside access is another." She was quiet again, and he could see her running through the implications of that, not panicking, just thinking, which he'd already identified as the way she handled information she didn't like. She absorbed it. She thought. She moved. "Talk to our IT security lead," she said. "His name is Ben Osei. I'll tell him to give you full access." "Thank you." She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating expression he was starting to recognize. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone more—" She paused, searching for the word. "Tactical. You know, ex-military, coming in hot, asserting things." "Asserting things doesn't tell you anything you didn't already know," Ethan said. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the shape of one held at a distance. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "The photo on your shelf. That your mother?" She glanced at it. Something crossed her expression. Not pain, exactly. more like the kind of feeling that has been lived with long enough to lose its sharpest edges without disappearing. She was, she said. She died 4 years ago. I'm sorry, he said. Not because it seemed required, but because he meant it. Vanessa looked at the photo for another second. She was the one who told me to stop apologizing for taking up space, she said. She said it like it was obvious, like she couldn't understand why it needed saying. She looked back at Ethan. It needed saying about 50 more times before it actually landed. He didn't have a response to that. He didn't try to invent one. 8 days, he said instead, to the Langford event. 8 days, she confirmed. He left the office and walked back through the hallway toward the elevator, past Claire's desk where a phone was ringing unanswered, past the framed company timeline on the wall, past the quiet hum of people working in the open-plan space beyond the glass partition. 8 days. He had a feeling that whatever had started in a hotel lobby with a man's hand on a wheelchair was not close to finished. He didn't know its shape yet. He didn't know who else was involved or what they were willing to do. But he'd spent enough years operating in environments where you didn't have the full picture and had to act anyway to know that the feeling itself was worth trusting. He pressed the elevator button and waited, standing straight, hands at his sides, watching the floor numbers descend. Ben Osei was 29 years old and had the specific energy of someone who had been told his whole life that he was the smartest person in the room and had spent the last several years quietly discovering that being smart and being right were not always the same thing. He was good at his job, genuinely good, the kind of good that came from caring about the work rather than just the outcome. And he showed Ethan the company's security architecture on a Tuesday morning with the careful thoroughness of someone who took pride in what he'd built. It took Ethan about 40 minutes to find the problem, not because it was obvious. It wasn't. Ben had built solid perimeter defenses. The issue was interior, which was almost always where issues lived in systems designed by people who thought primarily about external threats. There was a third-party vendor integration, a scheduling and logistics platform that Sterling Technologies had adopted 14 months ago, that had broader read permissions than it needed. Not write access, not anything that would trigger an alarm, just the ability to pull calendar data, meeting notes tagged as non-confidential, and executive movement schedules. Who approved this integration? Ethan asked. Ben looked at the screen. He pulled up the authorization log. He was quiet for a moment that stretched a little longer than comfortable. The approval was processed through IT management 18 months ago, before I was lead. He scrolled further. The vendor is TerraSync Solutions. Ethan wrote the name down. Pull everything you can on TerraSync. Who owns it? Who the clients are? Whether there's any financial relationship with any company in Whitfield's investment portfolio. Ben looked at him sideways. That's going to take how long? If I start now, end of day tomorrow. Maybe faster if I don't sleep. Start now, Ethan said. Sleep. He spent the rest of that morning walking the Langford Center with Claire and the lead contractor from the security agency, a compact, serious woman named Sandra who'd been doing corporate event security for 12 years and knew her business. He walked every floor. He stood in the positions that the scheduled program would place Vanessa throughout the evening. The reception area on the ground floor, the main presentation hall on the second level, the private dining room reserved for the final board session on the third. He noted the access points, the service corridors, the location of the building's internal communication systems, the camera coverage, and the 2 places where camera coverage had gaps. He asked Sandra to arrange additional coverage for both gaps. It's within budget, she said, but it'll mean pulling from the entry team. Don't pull from entry, Ethan said. I'll get authorization for additional personnel. He called Claire from the parking structure outside. I need 2 more bodies from the agency for the Langford event, specifically for interior coverage. I'll need Vanessa's sign-off on the cost. Get it. Tonight if you can. A pause. Is something wrong? He thought about how to answer that. I don't know yet, he said. I want to be wrong. Claire called back 2 hours later. Sign-off granted. He drove home that night later than he'd planned and arrived to find Mrs. Okafor sitting in the kitchen with Lily, both of them at the table with the colored pencils spread between them. Mrs. Okafor was drawing something that appeared to be a very enthusiastic cat. Lily was drawing something that appeared to be the underground city from the book, complete with tiny tunnels and what might have been a subway system. "You're late," Lily said, not looking up from the tunnels. "I know. I'm sorry." Mrs. Okafor made soup. He looked at Mrs. Okafor. "You didn't have to do that." "I was hungry," Mrs. Okafor said simply. "The soup is on the stove. Eat." He ate standing at the counter, which he knew was not what Mrs. Okafor considered proper, but she let it go. The soup was good, some kind of tomato base with herbs he couldn't fully identify, warm in the specific way that food is warm when someone else made it. He ate the whole bowl. After Mrs. Okafor left and Lily was in bed, he sat at the table with the colored pencils still spread across it, and his laptop open to everything he could find on TerraSync Solutions. The company had been incorporated in Delaware 3 years ago. 12 employees. A client roster that was not public but could be partially reconstructed from press releases and vendor conference appearances. Nothing obvious. He noted the name of the registered agent, a law firm called Hartwell & Morse, and moved on. He'd give it to Ben in the morning. What he kept coming back to was the timeline. The TerraSync integration had been authorized 18 months ago. The Mercer acquisition talks had become serious approximately 16 months ago, 2 months apart. That could be coincidence. In his experience, coincidence in a tight timeline was something you noted and did not explain away. He closed the laptop at 11:15. He was tired in a way that was starting to feel cumulative, the kind of tired that doesn't fully resolve with sleep anymore, that lives in the architecture of the day rather than just the end of it. He thought about Vanessa's face in that hotel lobby, the rigid spine, the controlled expression, the quick decision to turn and face Whitfield rather than ignore him. She'd made the choice that most people in her position, in his experience, would not make. Most people, when publicly humiliated by someone with more apparent social capital, make a fast calculation about cost and walk away. She'd turned around. She'd asked him to repeat himself. He respected that. He respected it genuinely, which was different from professionally. And the distinction was one he was careful about because the professional version was easier to manage. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. The Langford Center event was 6 days out when Ben Osei appeared in the doorway of the small office Ethan had been using and closed the door behind him with the careful click of someone carrying information they're not sure how to put down. "TerraSync," Ben said. Ethan looked up. "Tell me." Ben sat down across from him and pulled up a document on his tablet. TerraSync Solutions is a subsidiary. The parent company is a holding group called Meridian Apex Partners. Meridian Apex has 7 portfolio companies. He turned the tablet so Ethan could see. Whitfield Capital Group has a minority stake in Meridian Apex, 18% as of their last filing. The room was very quiet. "How long did it take you to find that?" Ethan asked. 8 hours, Ben said. "They buried it through 2 intermediate holding structures. I only found it because the registered agent for one of the intermediate companies is the same law firm that handled Whitfield's restructuring in 2019. "Hartwell & Morse," Ethan said. Ben stared at him. "How did you—" "I saw them in the TerraSync Incorporation documents. I didn't make the connection." He leaned back. "Good work. Send me everything you have. The full documentation chain." Ben nodded. He started to get up, then stopped. This is bad, right? This means someone's been reading Vanessa's schedule, her meeting notes, everything tagged as non-confidential going back 14 months. It means someone had access to that, Ethan said carefully. Whether they used it and how is what we still need to establish. But the hotel, yeah, Ethan said. The hotel. Ben left. Ethan sat with the information for 60 seconds, which was about as long as he allowed himself to sit with anything before moving, and then he called Vanessa. She picked up between the first and second ring. "Ethan, are you alone?" A beat. "Claire's here. Can you get a few minutes?" Another beat. "Give me 2 minutes." The line went quiet. Not dead, just muffled. He heard the low sound of a brief exchange, and then a door, and then Vanessa came back. "Go ahead," he told her, He told her about TerraSync, about Meridian Apex, about Whitfield's stake, about the timeline. He told her plainly, without softening it, because she was not someone who responded well to being cushioned. She was quiet for a long moment after he finished. He could hear her breathing, steady and controlled, and he had the impression of someone who was running very fast internally while keeping their exterior still. "They've had access to my calendar for 14 months, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Potentially. The hotel wasn't a coincidence. Almost certainly not. They knew I was there. They knew the timing. They sent Whitfield in to—" She stopped. "To what? Scare me off? A man like Whitfield doesn't scare me off." "Maybe that wasn't the primary goal," Ethan said. "Maybe the primary goal was to see how you responded, what your vulnerabilities looked like under pressure, who you had around you." Another silence. "They were assessing me." "Possibly." He paused. "The shareholder event is in 6 days. They know the venue, they know the schedule, they know who's attending." "Because it's in my calendar." "Yes." She said a word quietly that she probably didn't intend to come through the phone quite so clearly. He didn't comment on it. "What do we do?" she asked. "We keep the event exactly as planned," Ethan said. "We don't change anything visible. We don't tip them off that we know about the access." "And invisibly?" "We change everything that matters. I'll need to restructure the security positioning at the Langford. Sandra's team is good, but they were briefed on the original plan. I want to rebuild the interior coverage from scratch without going back to the agency for it. Just you, me, Claire, and Roderick. Tight circle." "Roderick's solid," Vanessa said. "I trust him. I want 2 more people I can bring in personally. Former military. I'd vouch for them." "Do it." He started to continue, then stopped himself. "Vanessa." "What?" "You should tell legal tonight. Not because it changes anything we're doing, but because there needs to be a record of when you knew and what you did with that knowledge. If this goes legal after the event, and it might, you want that timeline clean." A pause. "You've been through something like this before?" He wasn't sure if it was a question. "Not exactly like this," he said, "but situations where the paper trail mattered afterward, yes." "All right," she said. "Legal tonight. Is there anything else?" "Not tonight," he said. "Get some sleep." A sound that might have been a short, dry laugh. "I'll add it to the calendar," she said, "since apparently everyone can read it anyway." He almost smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow." Or shoot. The next 5 days had a particular texture, the compressed, information-dense quality of a short timeline with a fixed endpoint. Ethan moved through them efficiently, but without the mechanical detachment he'd once been able to sustain for weeks at a stretch. He was older now, and out of practice, and the difference between 37 and 26 was something he felt in small ways. Needing 1 more minute in the morning, taking slightly longer to shake off a wrong instinct and replace it with the right one. He brought in 2 former colleagues, Marcus Webb, who had been a communications specialist with a talent for blending into backgrounds so completely that people would have conversations in front of him without registering he was there, and Donna Reyes, who was 3 years out of the military and now worked private sector but had maintained all the skills she'd built and none of the bad habits that sometimes came with private sector comfort. Both of them came in on short notice, without asking for more explanation than Ethan gave them, which was one of the specific things he valued in people he'd served alongside. The ability to work with partial information and not fill the gaps with assumption. He briefed them at his kitchen table on Thursday night after Lily was asleep. "Event venue has 3 levels," he said, laying out the floor plan he'd reconstructed from memory and supplemented with the building's public filing with the city. The shareholder presentation runs on level 2 from 7 to approximately 9 p.m. Dinner follows on level 3 in the private dining room. Ground floor is reception and overflow. 2 exterior access points, primary entrance on Caldwell Street, service entrance on the east side of the building that's supposed to be locked during events, but has been propped twice in my walkthroughs because the catering staff use it. "That's going to be a problem," Donna said. "I talked to the venue coordinator today. It'll be locked and monitored. I'm not fully relying on that." Marcus was looking at the floor plan. "Where's she most exposed?" "Level 2 to level 3 transition. The elevator is the only ADA accessible route between those floors. Single point of movement, predictable timing, limited camera coverage in the corridor outside the elevator bank. So if someone wanted to isolate her, that's where they'd try it, Ethan said. Which is why, Donna, that's your position for the evening. You stay on that corridor. Donna nodded. And you? I stay close to her throughout. Not visible close. Attendees shouldn't read me as security. I'll be in the room. What's the threat level you're actually expecting? Marcus asked. He had a way of asking practical questions in a tone completely free of drama, which was why Ethan had called him. I don't know the full shape of it, Ethan said honestly. The people behind this have spent over a year building leverage against a merger. They've used soft methods so far, schedule intelligence, social intimidation. Whether they'll move to something harder at the event, I genuinely don't know. He looked at both of them. I'm not expecting gunfire. I'm expecting pressure, manufactured chaos, possibly an attempt to create a situation that looks bad for her in front of 200 shareholders and financial press. Reputational attack, Donna said. That's my read, but we plan for worse. They worked through the positioning for another hour. Marcus wanted to walk the venue himself before the event, which Ethan arranged for Friday morning. Donna had questions about the contracted security team's radio protocol, and Ethan gave her what he had and told her to coordinate directly with Sandra. When they left at 11, Ethan sat at the table for a while with the floor plan in front of him. He made small adjustments with a pencil, moving his rough position markers, thinking through sequences. He had done this kind of work in environments where the consequences of getting it wrong were immediate and irreversible, and this was not that, but the stakes were not nothing. Vanessa had built something. Someone was trying to take it from her, not with anything that would look like taking, with the soft machinery of doubt and embarrassment and institutional pressure applied at precisely the right moments. He found that kind of thing particularly offensive, in the specific way that people who've operated in environments where violence is at least honest find the more elaborate forms of cowardice offensive. He folded the floor plan and went to bed. The night of the Langford Center event, it rained. Not dramatically, not the kind of rain that announces itself. Just a steady gray drizzle that started at 4 in the afternoon and showed no interest in stopping, that made the streets outside the venue reflective and turned the arriving guests into a procession of umbrellas and damp shoulders. Ethan arrived 2 hours before doors opened. He walked every floor again. He checked in with Donna, who was already in position on the level 2 corridor in clothes that read as event staff, efficient, unremarkable. He checked in with Marcus, who had managed to make himself appear to be a guest, which was a talent Ethan had never fully understood and deeply appreciated. He confirmed the catering entrance was locked and spoke briefly to the security guard posted there, a young man who seemed earnest and slightly nervous, which Ethan decided to count as an asset. He spoke to Sandra and verified that all 6 of her contracted team were in position at the access points. Then he went back to the ground floor and waited near the primary entrance for Vanessa. She arrived at 6:45 in a car that her driver, a careful, quiet man named Theodore, who Ethan had also reviewed, pulled smoothly to the curb. Ethan had the passenger door open before Theodore fully stopped. Vanessa came out in a chair configured differently than her usual one. Sleeker, lower profile, something she'd mentioned was her event configuration, better for navigating dense crowds. She wore dark charcoal, almost black, with a silk blouse that caught the ambient light from the venue entrance. Her hair was down. She looked objectively like someone who owned the building she was about to enter. She also looked like she hadn't slept much, which Ethan noticed and didn't mention. "How are we?" she asked quietly. "Good," he said. "Everything's in position." She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me it's going to be fine." "No," he said. "But we're ready." The corner of her mouth moved. "That's more useful anyway." The event opened at 7. Ethan moved through the reception with a glass of water he had no intention of drinking and the expression of someone attending to quiet professional business, which was accurate enough. He watched. He read the room in the way that had become automatic over years of practice. Not paranoid, not aggressive, just present, processing the space as a continuous data stream. He spotted the 2 Mercer board members with known Whitfield connections within the first 20 minutes. They were separated, each working different parts of the room, which struck him as deliberate rather than natural social movement. He noted it. He kept them in his peripheral awareness. Douglas Whitfield himself was not in attendance. His name had not been on the guest list, and Ethan had confirmed that 3 times. But absence was not the same as uninvolvement, and he was under no illusion about that. The presentation on level 2 ran from 7:30 to 9. Vanessa stood at the front, stood, not sat, using a standing assist mechanism she preferred for formal presentations, and delivered 40 minutes of content about Sterling Technologies' strategic positioning, the Mercer acquisition rationale, and the company's 5-year vision with the kind of specific, concrete clarity that made it difficult for anyone in the room to generate the kind of vague, institutional concern that Whitfield had been trafficking in. Ethan watched the audience more than the presentation. He watched the 2 board members. He watched the financial press in the back row. He watched the doors. Nothing happened on level 2. The transition to level 3 for dinner began at 9:15. This was the window. This was the corridor, the elevator, the 40 seconds of predictable movement where exposure was highest. He positioned himself 3 feet from Vanessa as the crowd began to move. He made eye contact briefly with Donna across the room, and she gave him a slight nod. Corridor clear. They moved toward the elevator bank. It happened in the stairwell access point 6 feet from the elevator, which was not a location Ethan had fully weighted because it wasn't a logical position. The stairwell wasn't accessible to Vanessa's chair and wasn't a natural gathering point, which meant it was exactly the location someone would choose if they knew his security logic. A man came out of the stairwell door fast and moved directly into Vanessa's path, colliding with the front of her chair, and immediately stumbled backward in a way that looked like an accident but wasn't. Ethan could read the choreography of it in the first half second, the way the stumble was controlled, the way the man's face was already arranging itself into outrage. "Watch where you're," the man started, loud enough to carry. Ethan was already there. He put himself between the man and Vanessa's chair without touching either of them, which required precise spatial judgment, and he looked at the man with the flat, specific attention that he'd developed over years in situations where projecting calm was itself a form of control. "You all right?" he said to Vanessa, without taking his eyes off the man. "Fine," Vanessa said. Her voice was even. The man, 40s, square-jawed, the look of someone used to being physically imposing, sized Ethan up and found something in what he saw that made him recalibrate. The outrage in his expression shifted slightly. "This woman nearly ran me over." "The camera at the end of this corridor," Ethan said quietly, "has been recording since 6 p.m. You came out of a stairwell that's on the other side of the building from where you'd need to be to access the dinner on level 3. He held the man's gaze. "So we can talk about what just happened, or you can go back through that door and find your way to the service exit. Your choice, and you should make it in the next few seconds." The man stared at him. Something worked in his jaw. He looked past Ethan at Vanessa, and whatever he'd intended to achieve with the manufactured collision, he could see now that it wasn't available. The moment had closed. He went back through the door. Ethan turned to Vanessa. "Let's keep moving." "Who was that?" she said, as they moved toward the elevator. "I don't know his name," Ethan said. "I'll find it from the camera footage." "He didn't come from our guest list." "No," Ethan said. He didn't. Donna fell in beside them as the elevator doors opened, and the 3 of them rode up to level 3 in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable so much as focused, the particular quiet of people who understand the situation they're in without needing to narrate it. The dinner on level 3 proceeded without incident. The 2 Mercer board members ate, participated in conversation that looked to Ethan slightly more subdued than natural, and left together at 10:40, earlier than the other guests. He noted the time. The final formal part of the evening was a brief closed session at 11. Vanessa, 3 Mercer representatives, and the company's legal counsel. Ethan positioned himself outside the room. Marcus was at the end of the hallway. Donna was covering the elevator. It ran 45 minutes. When the door opened, the Mercer representatives came out, and the lead one, a woman named Patricia Cross, who had the careful, weathered expression of someone who had been in a lot of rooms where things were decided, paused near Ethan for a moment. You're her security? Cross said. I work for Ms. Sterling, yes. Cross looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then she said, Tell her the vote is likely to proceed favorably, and walked toward the elevator with her colleagues. Ethan watched them go. Then he went to the room where Vanessa was still at the table with her legal counsel, papers spread in front of her, and told her what Cross had said. Vanessa didn't react immediately. She sat with it for a second, eyes down, one hand flat on the table, and he watched something in her shoulders release, very slightly, the way tension goes when a thing you've been bracing against finally passes. The man in the corridor, she said. Can we identify him? I'll have a name by morning, Ethan said. The camera got a clean image. I want it connected back, she said. I want the chain. Whoever sent him, connected to Whitfield, connected to the TerraSync integration, all of it documented. That's what we'll do, Ethan said. Claire appeared in the doorway. Car's ready whenever you are. Vanessa began gathering the papers on the table with the deliberate, methodical movements of someone who is very tired and is not going to show it until they're alone. Ethan waited near the door. He wasn't going to offer to help with the papers. He had learned quickly that she didn't want help with things she could do herself, and that the way people offered help was often where they made their mistakes with her. The softened voice, the slight hesitation, the unconscious recalibration that said without words that they didn't fully expect her to be capable. He stood at the door and waited the way he'd wait for anyone. She finished. She looked up. Thank you, she said. Tonight. We'll debrief tomorrow, he said. Get some sleep first. She moved toward the door, then stopped beside him. She was looking straight ahead, not at him. The man in the corridor, she said. He was supposed to make a scene. Make me look like I couldn't handle the pressure. In front of board members and press. Yes, Ethan said. It would have worked, she said quietly. Without you there, it would have worked. Not because I would have fallen apart, but because the optics. She stopped. People looking for a reason to doubt someone always find one. That's how it works. Ethan looked at her profile. They didn't find one tonight, he said. She nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a subject rather than a conversation. Then she went through the door, and he followed her out into the hallway where Marcus and Donna were already moving into escort position, and together they walked to the elevator as the rain outside, invisible from where they stood but present, steady, indifferent, continued to fall. By morning, he had the man's name. By the following afternoon, Ben Osei had connected him to a consulting firm with a direct contractual relationship to one of Whitfield's portfolio companies. The chain wasn't complete yet. There were 2 links between the consulting firm and Whitfield's direct involvement that still needed documentation. But it was close enough that Vanessa's legal team called it actionable and immediately began drafting the formal complaint. Ethan sat in Ben's office while Ben walked him through the final documentation map on a large monitor and thought about the specific texture of a problem when it begins to resolve. Not with a clean snap, but with a gradual solidifying, the way ice forms, one thin layer at a time. Is it enough? Ben asked. For legal to do something? Ask the lawyers, Ethan said. That's their job. But what do you think? He looked at the screen, 14 months of unauthorized schedule access, one manufactured physical incident at a high-profile event, a network of shell structures designed to obscure the relationship between a man's investment interests and his interference in a corporate acquisition. It wasn't the most complicated operation he'd ever encountered, but it was careful, and it was sustained, and it had nearly worked. I think, Ethan said, that people who spend a long time doing something they believe is invisible have a particular kind of confidence that makes them sloppy at the end. Ben looked at him. Is that a yes? Yeah, Ethan said. It's enough. The formal complaint was filed on a Wednesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon the news had moved the way things move in financial circles. Not loudly, not through press releases, but through the specific, rapid channel of people calling other people they trusted and saying, "Have you heard?" because it mattered to their own positioning whether they'd heard early or late. Ethan learned this from Claire, who had the particular skill of monitoring that ecosystem without appearing to monitor it, and who appeared in the doorway of his office at 3:15 with a look that said something had shifted. Three of the Mercer board members who were on the fence called Vanessa's legal team this afternoon, Claire said. Separately, within 2 hours of each other. Ethan looked up from the documentation he'd been reviewing. What did they want? To make clear they had no knowledge of what Whitfield's people were doing, very specifically worded, very specifically timed. She paused. Which tells you something. It tells you the fence is moving, he said. Toward us, Claire confirmed. Patricia Cross also called. She said the vote will proceed next Thursday as scheduled. She didn't say which way it would go, but she called, which she didn't have to do. Ethan sat back. He thought about the man in the corridor at the Langford Center, the manufactured collision, the prepared outrage, the way the whole thing had dissolved the moment it became clear it was being recorded and witnessed by someone who understood what it was. Sometimes the most complex operations failed the simplest way. Exposure. What about Whitfield directly? He asked. Nothing yet. His attorney sent a letter this morning contesting the characterization of the TerraSync connection as evidence of interference. Standard language. They're not panicking, but they're not ignoring it either. They'll negotiate, Ethan said. Men like Whitfield don't go to litigation if they can find a door that lets them exit quietly. Claire looked at him for a moment. You've dealt with people like him before. Not in business, he said, but the calculation's the same. She nodded and left. He went back to the documentation, but his focus wasn't fully in it, and after 10 minutes, he closed the folder and sat with his hands on the desk. The 3 weeks he'd signed on for were almost up, 6 days left on the original agreement. He hadn't thought much about what came after, deliberately hadn't, because thinking about what comes after a defined task while you're still in it was how you made mistakes in the present. But it was there now, the question of it, sitting at the edge of his attention. He thought about the hotel, the mop cart, the way the lobby had gone quiet when he'd stepped into the space between Whitfield and Vanessa's chair. He didn't miss the hotel work. He'd never been under any illusion that it was what he was built for, just that it was what was available at the right moment. But he'd taken a kind of comfort in its simplicity, in the clear beginning and end of each shift, in the fact that it asked nothing of him that he hadn't already given away somewhere else. This asked more. And the complicating thing, the thing he hadn't anticipated, was that he didn't mind. Vanessa called him into her office the following morning. Not through Claire. She called him directly, which she'd started doing in the second week, a small shift in protocol that both of them had noted and neither had commented on. When he came in, she was at her desk but not working. She was sitting with a cup of coffee going cold at her elbow and the look of someone who had been thinking rather than doing for a while. The morning light came in from the west-facing windows at a low angle and made the room feel more human than it usually did. Less like a command center, more like a place where someone actually spent time. Sit down, she said. He sat in the visitor chair, which was clear of folders for the first time since he'd started. I want to talk about what happens when the 3 weeks end, she said. All right. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup in a way that suggested it was more comfort than caffeine at this point. The original offer was temporary. I was careful about that because I didn't know you yet and I didn't want to make a commitment I'd have to walk back. She looked at him directly. I know you better now. So do I, Ethan said. Know you. She acknowledged that with a brief look. I want to offer you a permanent position. Head of executive security. You'd rebuild the functions. It's been reactive at best, and after TerraSync, it's clear we have gaps that go beyond what a standard contracted team covers. You'd have a budget, authority to hire, and direct access to me. He didn't say anything immediately. I know what you're thinking about, she said. Do you? You're thinking about your daughter. Not soft, factual. You're thinking about whether this is a job that lets you be where you need to be, or whether it's the kind of thing that has a way of expanding until it takes everything. She paused. Am I wrong? He looked at her. No. I've thought about that, she said. I want to be straightforward with you. There will be weeks that are hard. There will be events, situations, things that happen at inconvenient times. I can't promise otherwise and I won't. She set the coffee cup down. What I can tell you is that I'm not interested in a version of your work here that cost your daughter her father. I watched my mother do that, not with this kind of work, but with her career, and she regretted specific things until the end. I'm not building a company that runs on that." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a city bus went past on the street below, its engine audible through the glass. "There would need to be hard limits," he said. "School pickup most days. I'm the one who does it. Evenings, unless there's a real emergency, and I mean a real one, not a situation that feels like one." Agreed. "I'd need flexibility on travel. I can do some, but not extended. We can structure it." He looked at his hands, then at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes?" "The hotel, when Whitfield had his hand on your chair." He framed this carefully. "You turned around. Most people don't. They make a calculation and they keep moving. You turned around." She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. She was choosing something. He could see it. "My mother used to say, not said, used to say, that the first time you let something like that pass, you teach the world that it's allowed." She looked at the window. "I've tried to live by that. I don't always manage it. There are days I'm too tired and I let things go that I shouldn't." A small pause. "That wasn't one of those days." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you'll take the position?" "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a second, and there was something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter. The look of someone who had been doing a hard thing mostly alone for long enough that having a person they trusted in the room felt notable. "Good," she said. She picked up her coffee cup again. "Tell me what you need to set it up properly." They spent the next hour doing exactly that. He told Lily that evening, sitting at the kitchen table while she drew. He told her plainly, the way he told her most things. Not watering it down, not inflating it, just the facts in the right order. "So you're not going back to the hotel?" she asked, without looking up from her drawing. "No." "Is the new job safer?" He thought about that honestly. "Mostly yes. Some days no." Lily looked up from the drawing. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of asking questions that sounded simple but weren't. "But you'll still be here for pickup?" "Almost every day." "Almost. I'll tell you in advance when I can't be," he said, "and Mrs. Okafor will be here those times." She considered this with the seriousness of someone evaluating a contract. Then she went back to drawing. "Okay," she said. He watched her draw for a while. She was working on something new. Not the underground city, not a horse. It appeared to be a building with small figures in the windows. "What is that?" he asked. "Your new job," she said, like it was obvious. She pointed to a figure near the entrance of the building. "That's you." He looked at the figure. It had no face. She hadn't drawn faces in the small figures. But it was standing straight, and it was positioned between the building's door and the people inside. He didn't say anything for a moment. "Can I keep it?" he asked. She tore the page carefully from her sketchbook and slid it across the table. "I'll draw a better one when I get more practice," she said. "This one's fine," he said. But the Mercer acquisition vote passed the following Thursday, 11-3. Ethan heard about it from Claire at 6:15 p.m., a text message that said simply, "It passed, 11-3. And then, after a brief pause, a second message. She cried for about 30 seconds and then started making calls. "Thought you should know." He read both messages sitting in his car outside Lily's school, waiting for the 3:15 bell. He read them twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket. The bell rang. The school doors opened. Lily came out in her usual way, backpack sliding, already talking before she reached him. And he got out of the car, and she walked directly into the side of him the way she sometimes did, not quite a hug, more like using him as a wall for a second, and he put his hand briefly on the top of her head. "Good day?" he asked. "Okay day," she said. "Marcus apologized about the potato thing." "Good." "I said it was fine, even though it was only mostly fine." "That counts," he said. She climbed into the back seat, and he drove. 2 weeks after the vote, Douglas Whitfield's attorney negotiated a quiet settlement that involved Whitfield's investment group divesting from Meridian Apex Partners, and a formal acknowledgement, carefully worded to be deniable as a full admission but clear enough to be damaging if it ever surfaced publicly, of inappropriate conduct in relation to the acquisition process. The two Mercer board members with documented connections to Whitfield resigned from the board. The man from the Langford Center corridor, whose name turned out to be a consultant named Gary Pressman, was named in the complaint and ultimately barred from future work with any firm connected to the Mercer entity. None of this made the news in any direct way. It moved through the specific channels where these things move: law firms, boardrooms, the quiet recalibration of business relationships. And the people who needed to know about it knew, and the people who didn't know about it gradually became aware that something had shifted without being entirely sure what. Ethan spent the week after the vote building out his security framework. He hired a full-time analyst, a young woman named Priya, not the hotel's Priya, but a different one, which struck him as a small coincidence he had no use for, who had a background in corporate intelligence and a meticulous approach to documentation. He restructured the physical security protocols for Vanessa's daily movements, replacing the reflexive routine that had accumulated over years with something deliberately considered. He completed a full audit of the company's third-party vendor integrations with Ben Osei, and they removed 4 that had access permissions broader than their function required. Ben had started stopping by Ethan's office in the late afternoons, not always with questions, sometimes just to think out loud about systems problems in the way that people do when they find that another person's presence helps them think. "You know what bothers me," Ben said one afternoon, sitting across from Ethan with a tablet he wasn't looking at. "We had TerraSync in our system for 14 months. I built most of the security architecture around it. I tested the external attack surfaces repeatedly." He paused. "I never looked inward. I assumed the threat was coming from outside." "That's the most common mistake," Ethan said. "You don't seem bothered by it, the not knowing until you know." Ethan thought about how to answer that. "I've learned to be uncomfortable with incomplete information without being paralyzed by it," he said. "That took a while." Ben looked at him. "The military?" Partly just time." He paused. "You also caught it when it mattered. That's not nothing. You pointed me in the right direction. You did the work," Ethan said. "That distinction matters." Ben thought about that for a moment. Then he nodded and picked up his tablet and left, which was the efficient way he ended most conversations. No particular ceremony, just a natural stopping point. Ethan watched him go and thought about what he'd said, about looking inward, about where threats actually lived versus where you'd been trained to look for them. Vanessa called him into her office on a Friday afternoon in the 3rd week after the vote, which was not unusual, but the quality of it felt different. There was something deliberate in the way Claire had said she'd like to speak with you when she's free, some careful phrasing that didn't feel like scheduling so much as setup. When he came in, Vanessa was near the window, looking out at the city the way she sometimes did in the late afternoon, not seeing anything specific, just being present in the light for a moment. She turned when he came in. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to just listen first before you say anything." He sat down. "All right." She moved to the desk but didn't sit behind it. She stayed on the near side, facing him, which was a different geometry than their usual meetings. "When I was 26, she said, I was in an accident, car. On a highway outside Portland in January, black ice, a truck that came across the center line. I was in the hospital for 11 weeks. I had 3 surgeries. When I came out the other side, I couldn't walk." She said it with the flat, factual quality of someone who has told this story enough times that the words no longer have the power to ambush her. "I've used a wheelchair for the past 4 years." Ethan said nothing. "The company was 18 months old when it happened. 8 employees. I was running everything, fundraising, product, hiring, and I went from running everything to lying in a hospital bed being told I needed to think carefully about my capacity going forward." She paused. "You want to know who said that to me?" "Who?" "My own investors. The people I'd brought in, 2 of them." Her voice was even, but not empty. There was something in it, the specific residue of a thing that had been metabolized but not erased. "They called it a practical conversation. about leadership continuity, about whether I had the physical capacity to sustain the demands of running a company in a growth phase. She stopped. You hear that phrase, leadership continuity, and you recognize it now. Whitfield used it, Ethan said. Whitfield didn't invent it. It was already in the playbook. She turned to look out the window briefly. I replaced both of those investors within the year. I restructured the cap table, brought in people who wanted to bet on the work rather than calculate my physical depreciation. And then I built the company they'd decided I couldn't build. A small pause. I'm not telling you this because I want credit for it. I'm telling you because you've been working alongside me for a month, and you deserve to know what you're actually working alongside. He looked at her. Why now? She considered the question honestly. Because I trust you, she said, and I realized that in the conversation about your permanent position, I was asking you to commit to this company and to me without giving you the full picture. That's not fair. She met his eyes. You should know what this is. What I am. Not the public version. The actual one. He was quiet for a moment. The version where it's hard sometimes, he said. Yes. Where you get tired and things don't go the way they're supposed to, and the people you counted on say things you don't forget. Yes? He nodded slowly. I already figured most of that out, he said. People who make it look easy don't work like you work. The ease is always covering something. She looked at him for a beat. I'm not always easy to work with. I noticed. I get impatient when people don't move at my pace. I sometimes make decisions without enough input because waiting for consensus frustrates me. She paused, like she was finding the right word, a limited tolerance for the kind of institutional caution that's really just risk aversion dressed up as wisdom. I've seen that, he said. It's also why the company is what it is. She was quiet. Outside, a cloud moved and the light in the room changed briefly, going warmer and then leveling back out. My mother, Vanessa said, used to tell me that the hardest thing about being in a wheelchair wasn't the physical reality of it. The hardest thing was learning which battles to pick, because there are too many of them if you're looking. There's something every day that you could make into a fight. She looked at the photo on the shelf, the one Ethan had noticed on his first day. She said the only way to survive it was to decide what you were actually fighting for, and then fight for that, specifically, and let the rest go. Ethan followed her gaze to the photo. She sounds like she was smart, he said. She was, Vanessa said. She was also stubborn and impatient and not great at asking for help. She looked back at him. It runs in the family. He almost smiled. I hadn't noticed. She caught that, the edge of it, and something in her expression shifted in the way it did when something landed genuinely rather than performatively. Not a big shift, just a small relaxing around the eyes. The foundation, she said, moving back to the desk and pulling a folder. I want to talk to you about this. He straightened slightly. The foundation. I've been thinking about it since before the Langford Center. Since before you came on, actually. But it got clearer during all of this. She opened the folder. Sterling Foundation. The focus would be two areas. Veterans transitioning out of military service, specifically those dealing with physical injuries, and the gap in support services that exists when they're between active duty and whatever comes after. And people with disabilities and professional environments, specifically resources and advocacy around employment access. She paused. I want it to be operational, not performative. Not a thing we announce at a gala and then hand to a committee. Real programs with real accountability. Ethan looked at the folder. It wasn't thin. She hadn't just thought of this. What do you need from me? He asked. Your perspective on the veteran side. What the gap actually looks like. What resources would have helped you or didn't exist when you needed them. She met his eyes. Not a formal consultation, just your experience, what you know. He thought about the 2 years between the end of his service and the hotel job. The months he'd spent with savings running thin and Lily small, and the particular disorientation of a life that had been entirely structured and then was entirely not. The ways he'd looked for help and found either bureaucracy or well-meaning people who understood the surface of the problem without its interior. the offers that required him to be somewhere other than home, the silence when he asked about flexible work that took seriously both his skill and his situation. "I'll tell you what I know," he said. "It'll take more than one conversation." "I have time," she said. He looked at her, at the folder, at the photo on the shelf, at the cactus on the windowsill that he'd watched her water exactly once in the weeks he'd been here, giving it a concentrated dose of water on a Tuesday morning with the focused attention of someone who knows they've been neglecting something and is trying to make up for it in one go. "The cactus," he said. "It needs more consistent water than that." She looked at the windowsill, then at him. "I forget," she said. "I can see that." A pause. "Are you offering to water my cactus?" "I'm saying it's going to die if someone doesn't take a more regular approach." She looked back at the plant with the expression of someone receiving information they aren't sure how to integrate. "My mother gave that to me," she said, "when the company turned 1 year old. She said it was a plant for people who were very busy and occasionally forgot to pay attention to things that needed them." Ethan stood up. He crossed to the windowsill, picked up the small watering can she kept there. It was light, almost empty, and took it to the small sink in the corner of the office. He filled it halfway. He came back and watered the cactus with the slow, patient pour of someone who understands that too much at once is as bad as nothing. He set the can back. Vanessa was watching him. "Tuesday and Friday," he said. "That's enough for that kind." She looked at the cactus for a moment, then at him. There was something in her face that he didn't have the right name for. Something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite surprise, but was in the territory between them. The look of a person who has been managing everything alone for long enough that small gestures carry more weight than they should have to. "I'll try to remember," she said quietly. He went back to his chair and picked up the foundation folder. "Tell me about the operational model," he said. She did. They worked through it for the rest of the afternoon, two people sitting in a room where the light slowly shifted and the city moved outside the glass, and neither of them was entirely the person they'd been 6 weeks ago, though neither of them would have said so out loud. The folder filled with notes, his in the margins, hers between the paragraphs, the way documents look when more than one person is actually thinking about them. At 5:30, Claire knocked and put her head in. "I'm heading out. Ethan, your daughter's school called to confirm the family event next Wednesday." He looked up. "I have it." "They wanted to make sure you were coming. Apparently Lily told her teacher you were." "She's right," he said. Claire smiled, not the professional smile she wore for most of the day, but the actual one, and left. Vanessa looked at him after the door closed. "What's the event?" "Art show," he said. "She has a piece in it. She's been working on it for 3 weeks." "What is it?" "I'm not allowed to know until the night," he said. She's very firm about that. Vanessa looked at him with the small, genuine expression that appeared when something caught her off guard in a way she hadn't expected to find pleasant. "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet," she said. He looked at the folder in his hands, then at her. "Maybe," he said, "when the timing's right." It wasn't no. They both heard that. Neither of them made anything of it, which was the right thing to do. He drove to pick up Lily 20 minutes late, which was becoming a pattern on Fridays that he was going to need to fix. She was sitting on the front steps of Mrs. Okafor's building with her backpack between her feet and her sketchbook in her lap, drawing, entirely unbothered by the lateness. "Sorry," he said. "It's okay," she said, without looking up. "I was drawing." "What are you drawing?" She held it up. It was a woman in a wheelchair, drawn in the careful style she used when she was taking something seriously, detailed, considered, the proportions worked at. The woman in the drawing was sitting straight, looking forward, and the expression she had, even at the scale Lily worked at, even in pencil, was one of complete, settled authority. Ethan looked at it for a long moment. "Is that for school?" he asked. "No," Lily said. "It's just because." He looked at the drawing a moment longer. Then he held the door for her and she climbed into the car, already talking about the art show, about the piece she'd finished, about the specific placement she'd requested in the school gymnasium and whether she'd been given it. He drove, listening, the city going past outside the windows. Lily's piece in the art show was not the one Ethan had been expecting. He'd imagined something like her sketchbook work, pencil, careful lines, the architectural precision she'd been developing. What he found when he walked into the school gymnasium on Wednesday evening, with the fluorescent lights turned down and small lamps placed near each display, was a large format painting on canvas that the school had clearly helped her mount because it was bigger than anything she could have handled alone. It was the lobby of a hotel. She had painted it from memory, or from whatever version of it he'd described to her without realizing he was describing it. The marble floor, the fountain, the chandeliers that caught light and scattered it. And in the center of the painting, two figures, a woman in a wheelchair, spine straight, head level, and a man standing beside her in a gray uniform, both of them facing forward. The painting had none of the technical refinement of adult work. The proportions were slightly off in the way children's proportions are always slightly off. But it had something else, something that stopped Ethan for a full 30 seconds when he first saw it. It had the feeling right. You could look at those two figures and understand, without any caption or explanation, that something was being protected. Not the woman from the man or the man from anything, just something between them, some dignity in the way they both stood, being protected from the space around them that had not, until that moment, thought either of them worth protecting. "Dad?" Lily was at his elbow, tense in the way she got when something mattered more than she wanted to show. "What do you think?" He looked at the painting for another moment. He was aware of other parents nearby, aware of the low hum of the gymnasium around him, and he was also aware that his throat had done something inconvenient. "I think," he said carefully, "that this is the best thing you've ever made." She exhaled. "Mrs. Garrett said the scale was ambitious." "Mrs. Garrett's right, it is." She meant it as a criticism. "I know, it wasn't one." He looked at her. "How did you know what it looked like?" "I never described it." Lily shrugged in the way that meant she'd thought about this and decided the answer was simpler than the question. "You described it without describing it," she said. "When you came home that first night, the way you talked about the floor, the way you said the place smelled like flowers and money." She looked at the painting. "I just drew what I heard." He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, standing in a gymnasium in worn sneakers, with her hair in a braid she'd done herself, and that was, predictably, already beginning to escape. And he thought about what it meant to be known by someone. Not completely, not without error, but seen, accurately and without agenda, the way children sometimes see before they learn to edit what they're looking at. "I want to show someone this painting," he said. "If that's okay with you." Lily considered him. "Who?" "Someone I work with." She looked at the painting, then at him, with the assessing quality he'd always slightly marveled at. "The woman in the wheelchair?" she said. He paused. "Yes." She thought about it for another second. Then, "Yeah, okay." Bouquet. The Sterling Foundation was announced publicly 6 weeks after the Mercer acquisition closed. It was not announced at a gala. Vanessa had been specific about that from the beginning. No event, no red carpet, no ceremony built around the announcement itself. She released a written statement, a detailed operational document outlining the Foundation's 2 focus areas and its accountability framework, and a short video she'd recorded herself in her office, no script, that ran 4 minutes and 40 seconds. In it, she talked about the accident, about the 11 weeks in the hospital, about the investors who had quietly suggested she might want to think about stepping back. She talked about what it felt like to re-enter professional spaces in a wheelchair and navigate the specific accumulated friction of environments built without you in mind. Not just physical environments, though those too, but conversational ones, institutional ones, the ones where someone slightly adjusts their expectations of you before you've said a word, and you can see them do it, and you have to decide in real time whether to address it or save your energy for the actual work. She talked about the veteran transition gap without framing it as a policy problem, which was the framing that made people's eyes glaze over. She framed it as a specificity problem. The gap existed not because people didn't care, but because the support available was designed for the average case, and the average case was not a single parent with a child and a specific skill set and a need to be home at 5:15 on most days. She didn't name Ethan in the video. They discussed it, and he'd said no, and she'd said she understood and moved on without making it into a thing, which was one of the qualities he'd come to rely on. Her ability to hear no without adding weight to it. The video was watched 400,000 times in the first 48 hours. The comments were not uniformly kind. They never were, for anything Vanessa did publicly, and she'd long since developed a practical relationship with that fact. But the volume of response from veterans, from people with disabilities, from the families of both, was something that Claire printed out and left on Vanessa's desk in a thick stack because some of it needed to be read rather than scrolled past. Vanessa read all of it. Ethan knew because she told him in a brief, factual way that it had taken her most of Sunday. "There's a woman in Ohio," Vanessa said, in the Monday morning debrief that had become a consistent start to their weeks. Retired Army, spinal injury from a training accident 3 years ago. She applied to 14 companies in 18 months. 11 of them stopped responding after the initial call when she disclosed the wheelchair. 2 interviewed her and then went silent. 1 offered her a position at a salary 40% below what the role was listed at, no explanation given. She paused. She wrote 3 paragraphs, very precise. No self-pity, just the sequence of events. Ethan looked at his coffee cup. "What happened to her?" "She's freelancing, making it work. But freelancing because she has to, not because she chose it." Vanessa set the printed pages down. "That's the thing I want the foundation to address. Not in a way that requires those women to perform their struggle for a committee. In a way that actually shifts the material circumstances." "Employment pipeline," Ethan said. "Direct relationships with companies who commit to specific hiring practices, not general diversity statements." "Yes. And accountability on the back end. Not just whether they hire, whether those people are still there in 2 years, whether they're advancing, whether the environment is actually sustainable." He nodded. "I'll set up the first advisory meeting for next week. I have 3 people I want in the room." "Add Ben," she said. "He has thoughts on the veteran side that I think are worth hearing." Ethan looked at her. "Ben Osei has thoughts on the veteran transition gap?" His uncle was a Marine, medically discharged after 15 years. Ben watched the whole thing at close range. She held Ethan's gaze. People's connections to things are not always visible on the surface. He sat with that for a moment. "No," he said, "they're not." The Hargrove Grand announced in early spring that it would host the annual Leadership and Innovation Awards ceremony, which it had done for the past 7 years and which drew, in the usual course of things, exactly the kind of crowd that the hotel was built for. People with money and the kind of institutional recognition that money eventually converted into. This year, Vanessa Sterling was on the shortlist for the top award. Ethan learned about it from Claire, who mentioned it with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they weren't sure how to frame. "She hasn't decided whether to attend," Claire said. "Why not?" Claire looked at him with the expression she wore when she was choosing words. "The venue," she said. He understood immediately. "The Hargrove." She didn't say it directly, but she shifted the conversation twice when I brought it up. He knocked on Vanessa's office door that afternoon. She was at her desk, working through contract documentation with the focused stillness she brought to legal reading, slightly hunched, one hand on the page, the rest of the world temporarily suspended. "The Hargrove Awards," he said. She looked up, set her pen down. "Claire talked to you." "She mentioned it." Vanessa looked at the desk for a moment. There was something in her expression that wasn't fear. She didn't do fear in the way that word usually meant, but something adjacent to it. The look of a place in the memory that still had some tenderness to it when you pressed. "It's just a venue," she said, in the tone of someone arguing with themselves. "It is," he said. "It's also the specific lobby where a man put his hand on your chair and 30 people watched." She was quiet. "You don't have to go," he said. "That's a complete sentence. You don't have to explain it or reframe it." "I know that." She looked at the window. "But there's also the other thing." "What other thing?" She turned back to him. "The version of this where I go. Where I walk into that lobby, where I roll into that lobby. And I'm not the woman they're whispering about. I'm the woman they're giving an award to." She said it evenly, but he heard what was underneath it. Not bravado, something more complicated than that. The specific desire to complete a thing, to return to the place where something was taken from you and find that it can no longer take anything. That's also a complete sentence, he said. She looked at him. Which one do you think I should pick? He thought about it honestly, because she was asking him honestly. I think you already know, he said. I think you decided before you shifted the conversation with Claire. I think you're asking me to confirm it. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, slowly, she almost smiled. The real one, not the professional version. You're occasionally very annoying, she said. I've been told, he said. Book the table, she said. And I want Lily there. He stopped. Lily? If she wants to come. It's a late night, so only if you think it's appropriate. She paused. I've been thinking about that painting since you described it. I'd like to meet the person who made it. He looked at her for a moment. I'll ask her, he said. Lily's answer, delivered at dinner that evening between bites of, not pasta, he'd branched out, was immediate and unambiguous. Obviously, yes, she said. Can I wear the blue dress? Yes. Will there be food? It's a dinner ceremony. Yes. Good. She went back to eating. Then after a moment, is she nice? Your boss? He thought about Vanessa Sterling, about the way she'd faced Whitfield in a hotel lobby when most people would have kept moving, about the woman in Ohio whose 3 precise paragraphs she'd read on a Sunday and carried into a Monday meeting, about the cactus on the windowsill that she still occasionally forgot, and that he had quietly taken on as a secondary responsibility without either of them making it official. She's complicated, he said. And yeah, she's nice. Lily nodded like this was the correct answer. Complicated people are usually more interesting, she said, with the confidence of someone who had arrived at a philosophy and was comfortable with it. He looked at his daughter. Where did you hear that? Mrs. Okafor, she said. She says it about you. Well, the night of the ceremony, it did not rain. The sky over the city was clear and very dark, and the lights of the Hargrove Grand were visible from 2 blocks away. The entrance lit in the specific way that expensive events were lit, warmly, as if the building itself were welcoming rather than just well-staffed. Ethan arrived with Lily at 7:15. She was in the blue dress and had allowed him to do something more structured with her hair than usual, which had taken 22 minutes and several negotiations. She walked into the entrance of the hotel with the careful, observant quality she brought to new environments, taking it in, filing it, not performing any reaction until she'd completed the assessment. She looked at the marble floor, at the fountain, at the chandeliers. It's like the painting, she said quietly. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at the corner where the concierge alcove was, then at the central area near the fountain, where 8 months ago a man named Douglas Whitfield had taken hold of a stranger's wheelchair and learned something about the costs of that decision. The marble was polished. The fountain ran. The space had no memory of what had happened in it, the way spaces never did. Lily, however, had painted it. It lived somewhere now. That felt to Ethan like it mattered, though he couldn't have easily explained why. Vanessa arrived at 7:30 in a car that Theodore pulled smoothly to the entrance, and Ethan had the door open before the car stopped, which was habit, and also something he'd stopped feeling self-conscious about. She came out in the event chair in deep burgundy, a color he hadn't seen her wear before, with her hair up and the composed expression that was her public face, though he knew now what the differences were between that face and her private one, and he could see if he looked at the right angle that she was carrying something tonight. Not anxiety, something more like intention. She looked at Lily first. You must be the painter, she said. Lily looked at her with the direct, evaluating quality that she applied to everything. You must be the woman in the wheelchair, she said. There was a beat. Ethan prepared to say something. Vanessa laughed. A real one, short and genuine, the kind that arrived before the professional composure could catch it. That's accurate, she said. Vanessa. Lily. She considered for a moment. My dad says you're complicated. Lily, Ethan said. He also said you're nice, Lily added. He said both things. Vanessa looked at Ethan over Lily's head with an expression that was trying to stay neutral and not fully succeeding. Did he? I paraphrased, Ethan said. Accurately, it sounds like. She looked back at Lily. I saw a photograph of your painting. Your father described it to me. I'd very much like to see it in person someday, if that's all right with you. Lily thought about this with the seriousness she gave to actual decisions. You can have it, she said. If you want, I can make another one. Something moved through Vanessa's expression, the tender, unguarded quality that appeared when something landed without warning. I'd like that very much, she said. They went inside. The lobby received them the way lobbies receive people who belong in them, which is to say, it received Vanessa Sterling with the particular indifference of a space that has already moved on. The concierge at the front desk, a different one from 8 months ago, someone new, nodded as they came through. Other guests were arriving, the low hum of a formal evening beginning to build. No one whispered, no one adjusted their expression at the sight of the wheelchair in a way that carried meaning. Ethan noticed. He suspected Vanessa noticed too. Neither of them said anything about it. The ceremony was held in the grand ballroom on the second level, which the Hargrove had configured for 200 guests at round tables set with the kind of formal place settings that required a brief mental orientation before you knew which fork was which. Lily sat between Ethan and an elderly man named Arthur, who turned out to be a retired architect, and who, within 10 minutes, had become Lily's most interesting dinner companion, explaining with great enthusiasm the structural logic of the ballroom ceiling, which Lily found completely compelling. Ethan watched Vanessa across the table. She was in conversation with 2 people to her left, a man from the Mercer board and a journalist who covered the technology sector, both of whom were listening with the attention of people who had recalibrated their understanding of who they were talking to. She handled the conversation with the unhurried specificity that was her mode. No performance, no deflection, just the direct, considered quality of someone who said what she meant and meant what she said. At one point, she glanced across the table and caught Ethan watching. He didn't look away. She gave him the small nod that had become their shorthand. Everything's fine, I'm fine, stand down, and went back to the conversation. He ate his dinner and listened to Lily interrogate the retired architect about load-bearing walls. The award came near the end of the evening, after the speeches that always preceded such things, and that the audience received with the patient attention of people who knew what they were waiting for. The presenter was a woman from the Industry Association who spoke with genuine warmth about the criteria, not just professional achievement, but the quality of leadership that made the people around it better, that changed the conditions rather than just operating within them. When Vanessa's name was announced, the room responded in the way rooms respond when an outcome feels correct. Not surprised, not merely polite, but with the specific energy of recognition, of something being formally confirmed that had already been privately true. She went to the front in the event chair. She accepted the award, a glass piece, clean-lined, not ostentatious, and she held it for a moment before she spoke. I'm going to skip the part where I say I don't deserve this, she said, because I do, and false modesty helps no one. A laugh from the room. A real one. I'm also going to skip the part where I make this sound like it was straightforward, she said, because it wasn't. None of it was. The company was not built in ideal conditions. It was built in the specific conditions I had, which were sometimes difficult and occasionally very difficult, and included more than one moment where the reasonable calculation was to stop. She paused. I didn't stop. That's partly stubbornness and partly something else. The specific knowledge that the people who expected me to stop were going to be watching, and I have never been able to fully remove that from my accounting. Another laugh, smaller and more knowing. What I want to say and mean, she continued, is that I didn't build this alone. That sounds like the thing everyone says at these moments. And it is, but I mean it in a specific way. I mean the people who moved when they could have not moved, who asked the right questions when the easy thing was to ask none, who showed up for the work not because it was comfortable or convenient, but because they'd looked at it and decided it was worth showing up for. She held the award with both hands. This goes to them, the ones in this room and the ones who aren't. You know who you are. She didn't look at Ethan when she said it. She didn't need to. He was looking at Lily, who was watching Vanessa with the focused attention she gave to things she was deciding to remember. And he thought about what it meant that his daughter was sitting in this room, in this hotel, watching this woman receive this award. He thought about the version of the night 8 months ago when he had put down a mop and walked 12 feet across a marble floor. He had not done it for reasons he could have easily articulated at the time. He'd done it because not doing it was no longer possible, not because of principle or training or anything he could reduce to a clean explanation, but because something had made a clear demand on him and he'd answered it, the way you answer something when you've run out of the interior noise that lets you pretend you didn't hear. He thought about what he knew now that he hadn't known then, about Vanessa's 11 weeks in a hospital and the investors who'd called it a practical conversation, about the 14 months of calendar access through a vendor integration that had been buried carefully enough to pass 3 rounds of review, about Patricia Cross, who had delivered a likely favorable vote to him in a hallway because she decided it was the right thing to do, the small pivot that sometimes changed everything. He thought about Lily's painting, the 2 figures standing in a lobby, the feeling it had, that feeling of something being protected. He had spent years learning to operate in the world at a distance, present, competent, reliable, but held slightly back. The way you hold things back when you've learned that the cost of full investment can arrive without warning and leave a specific kind of damage. It was a reasonable adaptation. He didn't criticize himself for it, but he recognized, sitting in this ballroom on this evening, that he had somewhere in the past several months stopped doing it, or stopped doing it as completely, and the recognition of that was not alarming the way he might have once expected. It felt more like coming to the surface. After the ceremony, after the formal portion of the evening wound down and the room became the looser, noisier thing it became when the agenda ended, Lily found Vanessa near the edge of the room and presented her with something. Ethan watched from a few feet away and did not intervene. It was a drawing, a small one, done on the paper from the program. Lily had been working on it through the award speeches, and he'd clocked it and said nothing. She handed it to Vanessa with the careful directness she used when she meant something. Vanessa looked at it. Her expression did the thing it did when something arrived before the composure could catch it. "It's you," Lily said, "accepting the award. I tried to get the chair right." "You got it right," Vanessa said quietly. "The arms are a little off." "They're not off," Vanessa said. "They're exactly right." She looked at Lily with the full attention of someone who was not softening their vision of the person they were looking at. "You have a real gift." Lily received this without deflecting it, which Ethan considered a small act of courage. "My dad says that too," she said. "But he's my dad." "He's also not wrong," Vanessa said. "Sometimes those things are both true." Lily thought about this seriously. "Mrs. Okafor says the same thing, about my dad." "Mrs. Okafor sounds like a person worth listening to." "She is," Lily said. "She makes really good soup." Ethan walked them out at 10:30, the 3 of them moving through the lobby, across the marble floor, past the fountain, under the chandeliers, and the space was exactly what it had always been, indifferent and beautiful, and lit with no particular awareness of any of them. Lily was quiet now, the tiredness of a long evening beginning to settle over her in the way it did, coming quickly and completely like a tide. At the door, Vanessa paused. Ethan stopped beside her. He followed her gaze across the lobby. At the corner where the concierge alcove was, at the central space near the fountain where 8 months ago everything had been set in motion by a man deciding that the woman in front of him was not worth the ordinary courtesy he'd have offered anyone else. "The same floor," Vanessa said quietly. "Same floor," Ethan agreed. She was quiet for a moment. He didn't feel it. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said, "back at the beginning, when I asked why you got involved." She glanced at him sideways. "You said it wasn't complicated. He had his hand on my chair. I didn't put it there." "I remember." "I've thought about that a lot," she said. "The plainness of it. Most people would have given me something bigger, something about justice or standing up for what's right." She looked back at the lobby. "You just described what happened, what was actually there." He looked at her. "What was actually there was enough," he said. She nodded slowly, and he could see her sitting with that, turning it, the way she turned things that mattered. "I want to be that honest," she said, "in how I run the company, how I run the foundation, just accurate about what's there, not the version that sounds better." You mostly are, he said. Mostly, she said, with the dry self-awareness she applied to her own shortcomings. I'm working on the rest. Lily had leaned against Ethan's side with the unselfconscious exhaustion of a child who had stopped managing her tiredness and was simply being tired. He put his arm around her without looking down. Get home, Vanessa said. Both of you. You sure about Theodore? Theodore has been driving me for 4 years, she said. Go. He nodded. He started to move, then stopped. He turned back. The cactus, he said. She looked at him. What about it? Friday, he said. Don't forget. Something in her face, that small, real thing, moved briefly into view. I won't, she said. He didn't say anything else. He guided Lily through the door and out into the night air, which was cool and clear in the way city air occasionally was when something moved through and cleared it. And Lily walked beside him with her eyes half closed and the drawing of the hotel folded in her program under her arm, the one she'd carry home and put on her wall and not paint over, as it turned out, because she decided the first version had something the second one might not. In the years that followed, and there were years with the texture and complication that years actually had, Ethan would not be able to identify the single moment when his life had changed direction. It wasn't the lobby. It wasn't the job offer. It wasn't any one conversation or decision or event that he could point to and say, there, that's where it turned. It was accumulated, the way most true things were. Small choices made in the direction of being present rather than protected. The decision to answer something when it asked. The way Lily had painted 2 figures in a lobby and captured, without being able to name it, the simple truth that standing beside someone was its own kind of answer to the world's tendency to leave people standing alone. He had spent years believing that the mission was behind him, that the version of himself capable of that kind of commitment had been left somewhere in the places he didn't talk about, traded for something quieter and safer and manageable, and that this was a reasonable trade, maybe even the right one. What he understood now was that the mission had not gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for a question worth answering, for work that needed exactly what he had to give, for a 9-year-old who looked at her father with her mother's eyes and drew what she heard without being asked. He took Lily's hand as they walked to the car. She didn't pull away, which she sometimes did now that she considered herself old enough to decide about hand-holding. Tonight she just held on, the warm, specific weight of her, and he held on back. That was the whole of it. It was enough.